Down and Out in Paris and London by George Orwell. Chapter 2. Life in the Quarter. Our bistro, for instance, at the foot of the Hôtel des Trois Moineaux. A tiny brick-floored room, half underground, with wine-sodden tables and a photograph of a funeral inscribed Crédit d'Armor, and red-sashed workmen carving sausage with big jackknives, and Madame F., a splendid Auvergnat peasant woman with the face of a strong-minded cow, drinking Malaga all day for her stomach, and games of dice for apéritifs, and songs about les fraises et les framboises, and about Madelon, who said, "Comme t'exposer un soldat, moi qui ami tous les régiments," and extraordinarily public lovemaking. Half the hotel used to meet in the bistro in the evenings. I wish one could find a pub in London, a quarter as cheery. One heard queer conversations in the bistro. As a sample, I give you Charlie, one of the local curiosities, talking. Charlie was a youth of family and education who had run away from home and lived on occasional remittances. Picture him very pink and young, with the fresh cheeks and soft brown hair of a nice little boy, and lips excessively red and wet like cherries. His feet are tiny, his arms abnormally short, his hands dimpled like a baby's. He has a way of dancing and capering while he talks as though he were too happy and too full of life to keep still for an instant. It is 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and there is no one in the bistro, except Madame F., and 1 or 2 men who are out of work, but it is all the same to Charlie, whom he talks to, so long as he can talk about himself. He declaims like an orator on a barricade, rolling the words on his tongue and gesticulating with his short arms. His small, rather piggy eyes glitter with enthusiasm. He is somehow profoundly disgusting to see. He is talking of love, his favorite subject. Ah, l'amour, l'amour, ah, que l'urfin m'ont tué. Ah là, messieurs et dames, we men have been my ruin, beyond all hope my ruin. At 22, I am utterly worn out and finished, but what things I have learned! What pieces of wisdom have I not plumbed! Ah, how great a thing it is to have acquired the true wisdom, to become, in the highest sense of the word, a civilized man, to become a raffiné, vicieux, etc., etc. Messieurs, dames, I perceive that you are sad. Ah, mais la vie est belle. You must not be sad. Be more gay, I beseech you. Feel high the bowl vide. Some young vine will not seek of sems like this. Ah, que la vie est belle. Listen, messieurs et dames. Out of the fullness of my experience, I will discourse to you of love. I will explain to you what is the true meaning of love. What is the true sensibility, the higher, more refined pleasure which is known to civilized men alone. I will tell you of the happiest day of my life, alas, but I am past the time when I could know such happiness as that. It is gone forever. The very possibility, even the desire for it, are gone. Listen then. It was 2 years ago. My brother was in Paris. He is a lawyer. My parents have told him to find me and take me out to dinner. We ate each other, my brother and I, but we preferred not to disobey my parents. We dined, and at dinner he grew very drunk upon 3 bottles of Bordeaux. I took him back to his hotel. On the way, I bought a bottle of brandy, and when we had arrived, I made my brother drink a tumblerful of it. I told him it was something to make him sober. He drank it, and immediately he fell down like somebody in a fit, dead drunk. I lifted him up and propped him back against the bed. Then I went through his pockets. I found 1,100 francs. And with that, I hurried down the stairs, jumped into a cab, and escaped. My brother did not know my address. I was safe. Where does a man go when he has money? To the bordels, naturally. But do not suppose that I was going to waste my time on some vulgar debauchery fit only for navvies. Confounded one is a civilized man. I was fastidious, exigeant, you understand. With 1,000 francs in my pocket, it was midnight before I found what I was looking for. I had fallen in love with a very smart youth of 18, dressed en smoking, with his hair cut à l'américaine. And we were talking in a quiet bistro, away from boulevards. We understood one another well, that youth and I. We talked of this and that and discussed ways of diverting oneself. Presently, we took a taxi together and were driven away. The taxi stopped in a narrow, solitary street with a single gas lamp flaring at the end. There were duck puddles among the stones. And on one side ran the high blank wall of a convent. My guide led me to a ruinous house with shuttered windows and knocked several times at the door. Presently, there was a sound of footsteps and a shooting of bolts, and the door opened a little. A hand came round the edge of it. It was a large, crooked hand that held itself palm upwards under our noses, demanding money. My guide put his foot between the door and the step. How much do you want? He said. 1,000 francs, said the woman's voice. Pay up at once or you don't come in. I put 1,000 francs into the hand and gave the remaining 100 to my guide. He said good night and left me. I could hear the voice inside, counting the notes, and then a thin old crow of a woman in a black dress put her nose out and regarded me suspiciously before letting me in. It was very dark inside. I could see nothing except a flaring gas jet that illuminated a patch of plaster wall, throwing everything else into deeper shadow. There was a smell of rats and dust. Without speaking, the old woman lighted a candle at the gas jet. Then hobbled in front of me down a stone passage to the top of a flight of stone steps. Voila, she said. Go down into the cellar there and do what you like. I shall see nothing, hear nothing, know nothing. You are free, you understand. Perfectly free. Monsieur, need I describe to you, forcément, you know it yourselves, that shiver, half of terror, half of joy that goes through one at these moments. I crept down, feeling my way. I could hear my breathing and the scraping of my shoes on the stones. Otherwise, all was silence. At the bottom of the stairs, my hand met an electric switch. I turned it, and a great electric layer of 12 red globes flooded the cellar with a red light. And behold, I was not in a cellar, but in a bedroom, a great, rich, garish bedroom colored blood red from top to bottom. Figure to yourselves, monsieur and madame. Red carpet on the floor, red paper on the walls, red plush on the chairs, even the ceiling red, everywhere red, burning into the eyes. It was a heavy, stifling red, as though the light was shining through bowls of blood. At the far end stood a huge square bed with quilts red like the rest, and on it was a girl, lying, dressed in a frock of red velvet. At the sight of me, she shrank away and tried to hide her knees under the short dress. I had halted by the door. Come here, my chicane, I called to her. She gave a whimper of fright. With a bound, I was beside the bed. She tried to elude me, but I seized her by the throat, like this, do you see? Tight. She struggled. She began to cry for mercy, but I held her fast, forcing her head back and staring down into her face. She was 20 years old, perhaps. Her face was the broad, dull face of a stupid child, but it was coated with paint and powder, and her blue, stupid eyes, shining in the red light, wore that shocked, distorted look that one sees nowhere save in the eyes of these women. She was some peasant girl, doubtless, whom her parents had sold into slavery. Without another word, I pulled her off the bed and threw her onto the floor. And then I fell upon her like a tiger. Ah, the joy, the incomparable rapture of that time. There, monsieur et dame, is what I would expound to you. Voila, l'amour. There is the true love. There is the only thing in the world worth striving for. There is the thing which all your art and ideals, all your philosophies and creeds, all your fine words and high attitudes are as pale and profitless as ashes when one has experienced love. The true love. What is there in the world that seems more than a mere ghost of joy? More and more savagely, I renewed the attack again and again. The girl tried to escape. She cried out for mercy. I knew that. I laughed at her. Merci? I said. Do you suppose I have come here to show mercy? Do you suppose I have paid 1,000 francs for that? I swear to you, monsieur, madame, that if it were not for that accursed law that robs us of our liberty, I would have murdered her at that moment. Ah, how she screamed with what bitter cries of agony. But there was no one to hear them. Down there, under the streets of Paris, we were as secure as the heart of a pyramid. Tears streamed down the girl's face, washing away the powder in long, dirty smears. Ah, the recoverable time. You, monsieur, dame, you have not cultivated the finer sensibilities of love. For you, such pleasure is almost beyond conception. And I too, now that my youth is gone, youth shall never again see life so beautiful as that. It is finished. Ah, yes, it is gone forever. Ah, the poverty, the shortness, the disappointment of human joy. For in reality, car en réalité, what is the duration of the supreme moment of love? It is nothing, an instant, a second perhaps, a second of ecstasy, and after that, dust, ashes, nothingness. And so, just for one instant, I captured the supreme happiness, the highest and most refined emotion to which human beings can attain. And in the same moment, it was finished, and I was left to what? All my savagery, my passion was scattered like the petals of rose. I was left cold and languid, full of vain regrets. In my revulsion, I even felt a kind of pity for the weeping girl on the floor. It is not nauseous that we should be the prey of such mean emotions. I did not look at the girl again. My sole thought was to get away. I hastened up the steps of the vault and out onto the street. It was dark and bitterly cold. The streets were empty. The stones echoed under my ears with a hollow, lonely ring. Oh, my money was gone. I had not even the price of a taxi fare. I walked back alone to my cold, solitary room. But there, monsieur et dame, that is what I promised to expound to you. That is love. That was the happiest day of my life. He was a curious specimen, Charlie. I describe him just to show what diverse characters could be found flourishing in the Côte d'Or quarter. Chapter 3. I lived in the Côte d'Or quarter for about a year and a half. One day in summer, I found that I had just 450 francs left, and beyond this, nothing but 36 francs a week, which I earned by giving English lessons. Hitherto, I had not thought about the future, but I now realized that I must do something at once. I decided to start looking for a job, and very luckily, as it turned out, I took the precaution of paying 200 francs for a month's rent in advance. With the other 250 francs, beside the English lessons, I could live a month, and in a month I could probably find work. I aimed at becoming a guide to one of the tourist companies, or perhaps an interpreter. However, a piece of bad luck prevented this. One day there turned up at the hotel a young Italian who called himself a compositor. He was rather an ambiguous person, for he wore side whiskers, which are the mark either of an Apache or an intellectual, and nobody was quite certain in which class to put him. Madame F. did not like the look of him and made him pay a week's rent in advance. The Italian paid the rent and stayed 6 nights at the hotel. During this time, he managed to prepare some duplicate keys, and on the last night, he robbed a dozen rooms, including mine. Luckily, he did not find the money that was in my pocket, so I was not left penniless. I was left with just 47 francs, that is, 7 and 10 pence. This put an end to my plans of looking for work. I now had to live at the rate of about 6 francs a day, and from the start it was too difficult to leave much thought for anything else. It was now that my experiences of poverty began, for 6 francs a day, if not actual poverty, is on the fringe of it. 6 francs is a shilling, and you can live on a shilling day in Paris if you know how. But it is a complicated business. It is altogether curious, your first contact with poverty. You've no thought so much about poverty. It is a thing you have feared all your life, the thing you knew would happen to you sooner or later. And it is all so utterly and prosaically different. You thought it would be quite simple. It is extraordinarily complicated. You thought it would be terrible. It is merely squalid and boring. It is the peculiar lowness of poverty that you discover first, the shift that it puts you to, the complicated meanness, the crust wiping. You discover, for instance, the secrecy attaching to poverty. At a sudden stroke, you have been reduced to an income of 6 francs a day. But of course, you dare not admit it. You've got to pretend that you are living quite as usual. From the start, it tangles you in a net of lies, and even with the lies, you can hardly manage it. You stop sending clothes to the laundry, and the laundress catches you in the street and asks you why. You mumble something, and she, thinking you are sending the clothes elsewhere, is your enemy for life. The tobacconist keeps asking you why you've cut down your smoking. There are letters you want to answer and cannot because stamps are too expensive. And then there are your meals. Meals are the worst difficulty of all. Every day at mealtimes you go out, ostensibly to a restaurant, and loaf an hour in the Luxembourg Gardens, watching the pigeons. Afterwards, you smuggle home your food in your pockets. Your food is bread and margarine, or bread and wine, and even the nature of the food is governed by lies. You have to buy rye bread instead of household bread because the rye loaves, though dearer, are round and can be smuggled in your pockets. This wastes you a franc a day. Sometimes, to keep up appearances, you have to spend 60 centimes on a drink and go correspondingly short of food. Your linen gets filthy, and you run out of soap and razor blades. Your hair wants cutting, and you try to cut it yourself, with such fearful results that you have to go to the barber after all and spend the equivalent of a day's food. All day, you are telling lies, and expensive lies. You discover the extreme precariousness of your 6 francs a day. Mean disasters happen and rob you of food. You have spent your last 80 centimes on half a liter of milk and are boiling it over the spirit lamp. While it boils, a bug runs down your forearm. You give the bug a flick with your nail, and it falls, plop, straight into the milk. There's nothing for it but to throw the milk away and go foodless. You go to the baker's to buy a pound of bread, and you wait while the girl cuts a pound for another customer. She is clumsy and cuts more than a pound. "Pardon, monsieur," she says. "I suppose you don't mind paying 2 sous extra." Bread is a franc a pound, and you have exactly a franc. When you think that you too might be asked to pay 2 sous extra, and would have to confess that you could not, you bolt in panic. It is hours before you dare venture into a baker's shop again. You go to the greengrocer's to spend a franc on a kilogram of potatoes, but one of the pieces that make up the franc is a Belgian piece, and the shopman refuses it. You slink out of the shop and can never go there again. You have strayed into a respectable quarter, and you see a prosperous friend coming. To avoid him, you dodge into the nearest cafe. Once in the cafe, you must buy something, so you spend your last 50 centimes on a glass of black coffee with a dead fly in it. Once could multiply these disasters by the 100. They are part of the process of being hard up. You discover what it is like to be hungry. With bread and margarine in your belly, you go out and look into the shop windows. Everywhere there is food insulting you in huge, wasteful piles. Whole dead pigs, baskets of hot loaves, great yellow blocks of butter, strings of sausages, mountains of potatoes, vast Gruyere cheeses like grindstones. A sniveling self-pity comes over you at the sight of so much food. You plan to grab a loaf and run, swallowing it before they catch you, and you refrain from pure funk. You discover the boredom which is inseparable from poverty. For half a day at a time, you lie in your bed, feeling like the jeune squelette in Baudelaire's poem. Only food could rouse you. You discover that a man who has gone even a week on bread and margarine is not a man any longer, only a belly with a few accessory organs. This, one could describe it further, but it is all in the same style, is life on 6 francs a day. Thousands of people in Paris live it, struggling artists and students, prostitutes when their luck is out of work people of all kinds. It is the suburbs, as it were, of poverty. I continued in this style for about 3 weeks. The 47 francs were soon gone, and I had to do what I could on 36 francs a week from the English lessons. Being inexperienced, I handled the money badly, and sometimes I was a day without food. When this happened, I used to sell a few of my clothes, smuggling them out of the hotel in small packets and taking them to a second-hand shop in the Rue de la Montagne Sainte-Geneviève. The shopman was a red-haired Jew, an extraordinarily disagreeable man, who used to fall into furious rages at the sight of a client. From his manner, one would have supposed that we had done him injury by coming to him. "Merde!" he used to shout. "You, here again? What do you think this is, a soup kitchen?" And he paid incredibly low prices. For a hat which I had bought for 25 shillings and scarcely worn, he gave 5 francs. For a good pair of shoes, 5 francs. For shirts, a franc each. He always preferred to exchange rather than buy, and he had a trick of thrusting some useless article into one's hand, and then pretending that one had accepted it. Once I saw him take a good overcoat from an old woman, put 2 white billiard balls into her hand, and then push her rapidly out of the shop before she could protest. It would have been a pleasure to flatten the Jew's nose, if only one could have afforded it. These 3 weeks were squalid and uncomfortable, and evidently there was worse coming, for my rent would be due before long. Nevertheless, things were not a quarter as bad as I had expected. For when you are approaching poverty, you make one discovery, which outweighs some of the others. You discover boredom and mean complications and the beginnings of hunger. But you also discover the great redeeming feature of poverty, the fact that it annihilates the future. Within certain limits, it is actually true that the less money you have, the less you worry. When you have 100 francs in the world, you are liable to the most craven panics. When you have only 3 francs, you are quite indifferent, for 3 francs will feed you till tomorrow, and you cannot think further than that. You are bored, but you are not afraid. You think vaguely, I shall be starving in a day or 2. Shocking, isn't it? And then the mind wanders to other topics. A bread and margarine diet does, to some extent, provide its own anodyne. And there is another feeling that is a great consolation in poverty. I believe everyone who has been hard up has experienced it. It is a feeling of relief, almost of pleasure, at knowing yourself at last genuinely down and out. You've talked so often of going to the dogs, and, well, here are the dogs. And you have reached them, and you can stand it. It takes off a lot of anxiety.